Dad left me alone to go on vacation with my stepfamily, but now he wants me to help my stepsister out. Okay, now let me tell you how things went sour after my mother died. I was just 9 years old when it happened, and it seemed like everything in my life had stopped making sense. I mean, my mom was my entire universe, you know? She was the one who made things seem regular and safe. However, when she died, that sense of safety vanished, and everything altered. At first, I thought it may be my father, Mike, who is now 47 but was in his mid-30s at the time, would hold everything together. I think I believed that since he was my father, he would step up. Spoiler alert. He didn't. For a time, everything was okay. It was just me and him, and we attempted to establish some sort of pattern without Mom. He'd take me to school and we'd eat supper together, but it wasn't great. But it wasn't bad either. About a year later, he began dating this woman named Jane. I didn't know much about her at first, other than that she was around 12 years younger than my dad, so she was 35. I recall the first time she came over for supper. She appeared pleasant enough, I suppose, but looking back, I should have recognized the warning flags from the start. After they became serious, Jane moved in right away. It wasn't long until she brought over her 17-year-old daughter, Betty. And let me tell you, Betty was the definition of spoiled from the moment they came in the door. It seemed as if they owned the area. Jane did not even try to make me feel included. She just took over, as if she had been in charge for a long time. And for some reason, my father just went along with it. Now, I was only 9 years old and still grieving the loss of my mother, so I didn't know how to deal with all of this. But I immediately saw that my father was changing. He wasn't truly my father anymore. It was as if Jane had become the focus rather than me. I'm not sure how to express it as if I were there, but I wasn't significant. Things became worse when it became evident that I wasn't being treated like a child in my own house. After losing my mother, you'd think my father and Jane would be sympathetic or understanding, right? But nah. Instead, they started treating me like a maid rather than a family member. Jane had this habit of giving Betty her whole attention while I was stuck doing all the housework. I wasn't permitted to say anything either because that seemed to be how things worked now. It came to a point where I was continually cleaning up after Betty. I mean, she was 17, but she acted like a kid, leaving her mess everywhere, and it was always my responsibility to clean it up. Betty would be out with her friends or sitting home watching TV while I was stuck cleaning dishes, vacuuming, or whatever duty Jane assigned me, and my father. He did nothing to aid. He pretended it was usual for his 9-year-old daughter to be treated like a cleaner. I could not understand why he was all right with it, but I also didn't know how to speak out. But do you know what truly worked for me? The Christmas excursion. This section still makes my blood boil when I think about it. That Christmas, they all agreed to take a holiday together. My father, Jane, and Betty were going somewhere lovely. I suppose it was a cabin in the mountains. I was first delighted since I expected to. It's Christmas, right? Family time and all that. But nah. I was informed that I had to stay at home and take after Betty's dog, Max. They actually forced me remain behind a dog sitter while they went on their luxury trip. Now, let me be clear. I adore dogs. Max was a fine dog, but not my dog. He was Betty's dog. I suggested we board Max or hire a pet sitter, but Jane quickly shut me down. She said that it was a waste of money and that I was perfectly capable of staying home alone for 3 days to care for him. I was 9 years old, and they left me alone to look after the home and the dog while they went out and had a good time. I recall sitting in the living room that first night, feeling absolutely abandoned. I felt terrified, sad, and enraged all at once. It was Christmas, for crying out loud. Instead of being with my family, I was trapped at home minding a hyper puppy that wasn't even mine. It seemed like my father no longer cared about me, like I wasn't a member of his new family. What stung the most was knowing that my father was comfortable with everything. He did not fight for me. I did not make an attempt to include myself. He simply went along with whatever Jane wanted, which was for me to stay out of the picture. That Christmas represented a watershed moment for me. From that point forward, I began to feel increasingly alienated from my father. He was not the same person I used to look up to. He became someone who let Jane make the decisions, and I was always the one who got the short end of the deal. Every holiday, every family celebration, it was all about Jane and Betty. I was just there in the background, supposed to do anything they wanted. In retrospect, I regret not speaking up more, but at 9, what was I meant to do? I didn't have the words or the confidence to confront my father or Jane. I just took it. That's presumably why things worsened over time. But here's the deal. I wasn't entirely alone. After that dreadful Christmas, my Aunt Sarah, my mother's sister, came over with my cousin, Danny Dot. They, quote, heard about what occurred and made it their duty to help me feel better. They came over Christmas presents, prepared a large supper, and made it seem like a true holiday. Danny even remained over after the incident to assist me in caring for Max, despite the fact that she did not have to. That's when I understood my true family wasn't the individuals I shared a home with, Dot. They were the ones that genuinely cared about me. Aunt Sarah and Danny were my rock after that. They did not have to step up, but they did. And that is something I will never forget. Without them, I'm not sure how I would have gone through all those years of being treated as if I didn't matter. That Christmas revealed who my true family was, and it certainly wasn't my father or Jane. OK, comma. So let me tell you how things turned out after the big Christmas debacle. As previously said, I began to distance myself from my father following that holiday. How could I not? It seemed like he'd chosen his side and not mine. But there's more to the story, and honestly, what occurred later only proved that I would never be accepted as a member of the family. First and foremost, Jane's situation did not improve. Actually, things grew worse. She began to feel more at ease in her role as the queen of the home, which meant that I was given greater responsibility. By the time I was 12, I was doing everything around the house, including laundry, dishes, and vacuuming, and every time I asked for help, Jane would just grin and add, "It's good practice for when you have your own home." One day, like what? I was 12. I didn't even know how to cook for myself, and she wanted me to keep the entire house pristine. Betty, on the other hand, remained the golden kid. She was 17 when Jane and my father married, and let me tell you, she could play her mother like a violin. Betty would always come up with an excuse when Jane asked her to do something around the house. Homework. She was either hanging out with pals or working on something essential. Jane simply ignored it every time. Meanwhile, I'd be washing the floors or tidying up after their small family meals. They seemed to expect me to blend into the background and serve as their unpaid maid. But you know what really ticked me off? My father simply sat there and watched everything unfold. He'd be sitting in his recliner, watching television, while Jane yelled commands at me as if I were a servant. He didn't say anything. He never once stepped in and said, "Hey, maybe you should help out too," to Betty, or perhaps Jane. I'm not sure if he was afraid to confront her or simply didn't care. Either way, it stung. When I was approximately 14, I tried to talk to him about it. I told him it wasn't fair that I was doing all of the work while Betty did nothing. Do you know what he said? "Life isn't always fair. You simply have to cope with it." That was it. No empathy, no comprehension. Simply deal with it. After that chat, I gave up on expecting anything else from him. This is where Aunt Sarah and Danny come back into the scene. After that Christmas, they did not just vanish from my life. They hung around. Aunt Sarah would come over on birthdays, holidays, and even odd weekends just to check on me. Danny was always available, even if she was a few years older than me. We got really close. She was like the older sister I never had. We'd go to Aunt Sarah's anytime I wanted to get away from Jane's continual nagging or Betty's messes. Danny offered to take me out for ice cream. We'd go shopping or hang around and binge-watch TV series. She was the first person I felt comfortable talking to about everything going on at home. She recognized how bad things were for me, and she never made me feel like I was overly dramatic or anything. One weekend, when I was about 16, I was staying at Aunt Sarah's house, and Danny and I were discussing how things were at home. I remembered telling her how Jane had shouted at me for not folding the laundry quickly enough that week. It was such a simple thing, but it had a profound impact on me. Danny simply looked at me and said, "You know, this isn't normal, right? You shouldn't be treated like way." It impacted me harder than I expected. I had spent so many years thinking that this was how life was meant to be. I hadn't realized how twisted up everything was. Danny and Aunt Sarah were always so nice to me, but it wasn't until then that I understood how different my life could have been if I hadn't been confined in that house with Jane and my father. It was as if something snapped in my head after that chat. I stopped caring about satisfying Jane or even persuading my father to take my side. I began focusing more on academics, hanging out with Danny, and simply doing stuff for myself. I still completed the duties because I had to, but I didn't let it bother me as much. I simply kept my head down and convinced myself that one day I'd be out of there, and I was correct. When I reached 18, I was accepted to college on a full scholarship. That was my ticket out, and I wasn't about to waste it. Jane didn't even say goodbye to me before I left for school. She only offered me a half-hearted good luck and returned to what she was doing. Betty didn't care either, but my father felt unhappy. He hugged me for what seemed like the first time in years and told me how proud he was of me. It was strange hearing it from him after everything, but at the time, it didn't mean anything to me. I was so concentrated on the idea that I was finally leaving that house. College was a whole other world for me. I got to start afresh, meet new people, and live my life without feeling burdened or made. Aunt Sarah and Danny were still my strongest supports. They sent me care packages and visited me whenever they could, and honestly, they were the only family I cared about at that time. But even after I left, Jane and Betty continued to stir up trouble, approximately midway through my first semester. My dad called me. He informed me that Jane and Betty had discussed it, and they believed it would be a good idea if I returned home for the holidays. He made it sound like a large olive branch, as if they were now ready to treat me like a member of the family, but I was not buying it. I could hear Jane in the background advising my father what to say, and it was clear she did not care about me. She just wanted someone to come home and assist with the Christmas preparations. I wasn't going to slip back into that trap. So I told him I was going to spend the holidays with Aunt Sarah and Danny, and that was it. He did not argue, he merely groaned and replied, "Okay, maybe next time." Yes, right. I knew there would be no next time. I had had enough of trying to sort things out with my father and Jane. They had an opportunity, and they blew it. I now had my true family, Aunt Sarah, Danny, and the life I was creating for myself. So after all that, I suppose the takeaway is this. Sometimes the folks you are born into a family with are not the ones who become your true family. People sometimes stand up when no one else would. This is precisely what Aunt Sarah and Danny did for me. Okay, now that I've explained how I dealt with Jane and my father, let's go on to what happened when I went out for college. You'd think that after you got away from them, everything would calm down, right? Okay, not quite. In fact, it appears that's when the real turmoil began. And of course, everything came back to one individual. Betty. So I've been in college for a few years now. I'm living my best life. I have terrific friends who are doing well in my classes, and I'm finally feeling in charge of my own life. Aunt Sarah and Danny are still very supportive, and I visit them whenever I can. However, due to the family situation with my father and Jane, I kept my distance. I figured if I just focused on school and stayed away, things would be fine. However, Betty appears to have had other plans. One day I received this random message from her. Now let me just say, Betty and I never really talked. She was constantly doing her own thing. As I previously stated, I was only the maid in her eyes. So when I saw her name appear on my phone, I was like, what now? She starts off acting friendly, as if we've always been best friends. She's asking me about college and what I'm studying, all that fake small talk, and I'm just sitting there like, what's she talking about? Because let's be honest, Betty was not messaging me out of the kindness of her heart. Then she gets to the point. It turns out she's having some trouble with her own college work. And by trouble, I mean she had failed a few classes and was struggling to keep up in school. Of course, Betty being Betty, she refused to accept any responsibility for it. She blamed it on her professors, unfair assignments, and everything but herself. And then she tells me why she's messaging. Hey, would you mind helping me with my classes? Could you maybe write a couple of essays for me? I know you're very smart, and it would mean a lot. Yeah, you read that correctly. Betty asked me to finish her homework for her. After all these years of treating me poorly, neglecting me, and acting as if I did not exist, she immediately required my assistance. I honestly couldn't believe she had the nerve to even ask. So I sat there for a minute thinking about how I should respond. Part of me wanted to just blow up on her to let all those years of frustration come out, but I knew that wasn't worth it. Betty wasn't worth the energy. So instead, I kept it simple. I messaged back and said, "Sorry, Betty. I've got my own work to focus on. Good luck with your classes." That was it. I didn't know her any well, and I wasn't going to get dragged into her mess. Of course, she didn't take it well. She attempted to guilt-trip me, saying stuff like, "I thought we were family, and you're meant to assist your sister out when she's hurting, Sister Dot." Since when did she consider me her sister? I wasn't about to let her influence me, so I just ignored the remainder of her texts. But here's where things get interesting. After I turned Betty down, it wasn't long before I heard from Jane. She rings me up, and I can instantly tell she's upset. She starts going off about how I'm being selfish for not assisting Betty, and how I'm throwing away an opportunity to bond with my stepsister. I couldn't believe what I heard. Like, seriously? After everything, they were still expecting me to bend over backward for them. I told Jane straight out that I wasn't going to do Betty's work for her, and if Betty was suffering, maybe she needed to take responsibility for once. Jane didn't appreciate my response. She began yelling about how I owed it to the family to help out, and how I should be thankful for everything they had done for me. What am I grateful for? For treating me as a servant for the most of my childhood. For leaving me behind whenever they went on vacation. I was not having it. I ended up cutting the talk short and informing Jane that I wouldn't alter my decision. I hung up before she could continue, and frankly, I felt quite good about it. For the first time, I set a boundary with them and refused to back down. However, that was not the end of it. A few days later, my father phones me. I hadn't heard anything from him since I moved out, so I was shocked that he was reaching out. He starts making small chat, asking how school is doing, and so on. But I knew where this was going. Sure enough, after a few minutes, he brings up the Betty issue. He attempts to play the mediator, saying Jane is unhappy and that I should rethink aiding Betty. He even threw in the traditional family sticks together statement, as if that would change my thinking. He mentioned something that made me giggle a little. Where was all this family discourse when I was the one who got left behind? Where was the camaraderie while I was cleaning up after everyone? I told him straight out that I would not be guilted into doing something that was not my duty. If Betty couldn't handle her own academics, it was her fault, not mine. Dad did not debate much after that. He simply sighed and replied, "I'm disappointed, but I understand." That was the end of the talk. I hung up, experiencing a strange mixture of feelings. I felt proud of myself for maintaining my ground, but I was also saddened that this was the extent of my connection with my father. I mean, deep down, I still desired a genuine relationship with him. But every time we spoke, it felt as if there was a massive wall between us. Anyway, following that, I didn't hear from Betty or Jane for a time, which was actually a relief. I concentrated on my studies, socialized with my friends, and just attempted to go on with my life. I was not going to let their turmoil get me down anymore. A few weeks later, I received a call from Aunt Sarah. She had heard about the issue with Betty and Jane and wanted to check in on me. We ended up conversing for hours, and she reminded me how little I knew about anyone. "You have your own life to live," she explained. "Do not allow them make you feel bad for doing what is best for you." She was correct, of course, and hearing it from her gave me even more confidence in my decision. I was not going to allow my father, Jane, or Betty make me feel awful about putting myself first for once. I had spent far too many years being pushed about and neglected, and now that I was finally starting to construct something for myself, I was not going to give it up. That's how Betty attempted to lure me back into the turmoil, and I said no for the first time, and that felt really darn wonderful. Okay, this is when things really took a turn. I was doing my thing, focusing on school and avoiding the turmoil at home with Jane and Betty. And for a time it appeared that they had gotten the word to leave me alone. However, peace did not last long. One day, out of nowhere, I received this email from my father. It wasn't very long or dramatic, just a brief email to indicate that he and Jane would want to chat. I recognized right away there was a problem. I had not heard from them in months. So if they suddenly decided to communicate, it was not going to be good. Still, I decided to listen to them because, despite everything, a part of me hoped they'd changed. Spoiler alert, they hadn't. So I agreed to meet with them. We settled on this little coffee shop in my hometown as a neutral location where I could quickly leave if things turned nasty. I came in, and they were sitting at a table as if nothing had occurred. My father seemed exhausted and older than I recalled, and Jane looked the same, cold and disconnected, as if she had a better place to be. After some awkward small conversation, they went right to the point. Jane, of course, spoke first. She enjoyed having complete control over the discussion. "We've been talking about the future," she continued in that phony, lovely voice she used when she wanted to appear sensible. "And we believe it is time for you to start thinking about your duties." I was perplexed. Responsibilities? What do you mean? That's when she smacked me with it. "Your father and I are becoming older, and Betty is going to need some assistance getting adjusted in life." I couldn't believe what I heard. They weren't discussing my future. They were discussing Betty's future. And in their thoughts, I was meant to help ensure Betty's well-being. "Do you remember Betty, who never helped me, who treated me like garbage and I hadn't spoken to in months since she only reached out when she wanted something?" "Wait, you want me to help Betty?" I inquired, attempting to maintain my composure despite the fact that my fury was rapidly rising. My father eventually spoke out, his voice worn and resigned. "She's struggling, and we assumed that as her sister you'd want to assist. You are doing well for yourself, and we wondered if you could give her a little boost, give her a lift. Was this a joke?" They asked me to financially assist Betty. Now, the same Betty who wouldn't bother messaging me until she needed help with her assignments. I felt like I was in some kind alternative dimension where everyone had lost their heads. I sat back in my chair, attempting to figure out what they were asking. "So let me get this straight," I said, gazing squarely at Jane, who I knew was the brains behind everything. "You want me to take the money I earn from the life I've created for myself and simply hand it over to Betty? Why? Because she can't get her life in order. Jane did not even blink. It's what families do. We aid each other. And since you're doing well, we believed it would be appropriate for you to assist your sister at that time." Something within me cracked. All those years spent being treated as if I didn't matter came pouring back, like if I was just there to serve them. I could not believe what they were asking. "I'm not doing it." I spoke, my voice strong. "I'm not responsible for Betty's life. She is an adult, and it is her responsibility to work things out, not me." My father wanted to join in, but I wasn't done. "Do you hear yourselves? After all, do you want me to immediately drop everything and solve Betty's problems? You never assisted me when I needed it. You allowed me to pick up after her. Let me be the one who was always left behind. And now that I've finally established my own life, you want to pull me back into this mess?" "No." Jane's expression stiffened, and I knew what would happen next. She always had a knack of making me feel bad. "You're being selfish," she remarked, her voice chilly. "We have done so much for you. So this is how you reward us? Turning your back on your family?" I could not help but laugh at it. "Do you honestly believe you have done so much for me? Leaving me behind on vacation, forcing me to do all the housework while Betty got a free pass? I was never treated as if I mattered. Is that what you believe to be assisting me?" My father stared down at his hands, saying nothing. However, Jane refused to back down. "We provided you with a house, we reared you, and this is the gratitude we receive. You will regret this one day when you understand how much we done for you." At that time, I was finished. I rose up, gathered my belongings, and looked them both in the eyes. "I do not owe you anything," I said in a firm voice. "I established my life on my own without your assistance. If Betty requires assistance, perhaps it is time for you to stand up and aid her. But I won't be a part of this." I went out before they could say anything further. My heart is hammering in my chest. I felt outraged, but also relieved. It felt nice to finally say everything I had been holding in for years. I wasn't going to let them drag me back into the destructive loop. I was tired of constantly having to make sacrifices for everyone else. After then, I did not hear from them for a time. There are no calls, texts, or anything. And honestly, it was great with me. I concentrated on my schoolwork, my friends, and the life I was creating for myself. I knew that no matter what, I had Aunt Sarah and Danny, who were my true family and had always been there for me. Not when it was convenient, but when it was necessary. I think the lesson here is that family isn't always about blood. About who shows up, who supports you, and who treats you with dignity. And Jane and my father, they never accomplished any of this. So yes, I walked away from them, and I do not regret it. So, after all that drama with Jane and my father, you'd think I'd finally get a break, right? I mean, I pretty much thwarted their entire attempt to convince me to support Betty. And I walked out of that coffee shop, believing I was done with them forever. But no, life wasn't going to let me off that easily. A few months after that conversation, I was nearing the end of my senior year of college. I had a nice job lined up after college, and everything was going well. Aunt Sarah and Danny were my pillars of support, and I was pleased with the direction of my life. I had broken off all communication with Jane and Betty, and being away from all of that turmoil was honestly the greatest thing I could have done for myself. But, as if on cue, just when I believed everything was calm, my father reappeared. I was in the middle of studying for my finals when I received a text from him. I had not heard from him since our uncomfortable coffee shop rendezvous, so when I saw his name come up, my immediate thought was, "What now?" The text was brief, with him asking if we could chat. There are no specifics, no explanations, just, "Hello, we need to chat." I pondered ignoring it, but a part of me hoped he wanted to apologize or something, like an idiot. I contacted him back and we decided to meet. We ended up meeting at the same coffee shop as the previous time. I stepped in, half expecting to find Jane sitting with him, but she wasn't there. It was simply him sitting alone, looking more exhausted than I had ever seen him. He had this expression on his face that told me whatever he was about to say wouldn't be nice. We engaged in the normal, uncomfortable small chat, but I could see he was apprehensive. Finally, after a few minutes, he just said it. "Betty's in danger," he continued quietly, "and I don't know what to do." I felt my stomach plummet. Here we go again. What type of trouble? I inquired, bracing myself for the inevitable lunacy that would ensue. She dropped out of school. He acknowledged while glancing down at his coffee cup. She couldn't keep up with her coursework, and she's okay. She has been making some unwise judgments. Let me stop right here. When he stated stupid judgments, I understood precisely what he meant. Betty had always been the sort to make poor decisions and then expect others to clean up the damage. And I had the impression that this time, they were hoping it would be me. "She's staying with us right now," Dad explained. "But Jane and I cannot keep bailing her out. She's accumulated up a lot of debt, and we don't know how much longer we can aid her." I simply gazed at him, waiting for the punchline. I could clearly tell where this talk was going, but I wasn't about to make things easy for him. "Okay," I spoke slowly. "So what does that have to do with me?" He glanced up at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw genuine despair in his eyes. "We hoped you could help her. You have a new job lined up, and you're in a better position to help her." There it was, the moment I'd been dreading since I saw his name appear on my phone. They asked me to bail Betty out again. I took a deep breath and tried to maintain my composure. "Dad, I'm not sure how many times I need to repeat it, but I'm not responsible for Betty. She made her own decisions, and if they put her in a difficult circumstance, that is her fault. I've worked my ass off to get here, and I'm not going to throw it all away to clean up her trash." He said nothing at first. He just sat there looking into his coffee, as if he was searching for the proper words. Finally, comma. He groaned and replied, "I understand. I truly do. But she is your sister." That was it. That was the breaking point for me. I couldn't hold back any longer. "She is not my sister." I snapped louder than I intended. "She has never been my sister. From the moment Jane entered our life, you and she made it obvious that Betty came first. I was never a member of the family. I was the one who cleaned up after her. The one left behind when everyone went on vacation. And now you want me to save her? No, absolutely not." He seemed surprised, as if he hadn't expected me to actually call him out like that. But I wasn't finished. "You and Jane made your own decisions too. You selected Betty first to make her your priority, and I accepted it long ago. However, you must now accept the consequences of your decisions. I am not going to be your backup plan. If you'd want to aid her, go ahead, but do not expect me to do it." The stillness between us was thick. I could see the anguish in his eyes. However, I did not feel horrible about what I said. For once, I stood up for myself, and it felt great. He eventually nodded, as if he knew where I was coming from. "I apologize," he said gently. "I didn't know how much we'd hurt you." I did not say anything. What was there to say? An apology was not going to change things. And at this time, I was not interested in repairing what was broken. I just wanted to go forward with my life. We drank our coffees in quiet, and as we left the cafe, I realized it was probably the last time I spoke to him. It was not a complete break, but it was a break. I wasn't furious any longer. Just finished. I'm done with the guilt trips, the manipulation, and the continual assumption that I'm meant to solve everything. After that, I graduated, got my new job, and continued on. Aunt Sarah and Danny remain my only family members. Betty, I'm not sure what happened to her, and I honestly don't care. She made her decisions, and now she must face with the repercussions. I haven't heard from my father since that day at the coffee shop. Maybe he realized I wasn't going to be the safety net they expected. Or perhaps he is too humiliated to seek out. Whatever the case may be, I am content. So that's the tale. I've learned that sometimes you have to move away from individuals who are meant to be family because they are just giving you misery. It quote, "s terrible, but it's essential." By the end of the day, I know I made the best decision for myself. Story 2. So I am a 33-year-old male, and I've had no touch with my father's side of the family in the past 12 years. This all started when my father remarried. I had a significant shift when I was about the age of 10. My parents split up because they were no longer in love. Even though I understand now, it shocked me as a child. I experienced a combination of shock and sadness, which caused me to act out frequently. We even tried family counseling to help things calm down, but it felt like just my mother was trying to get me. My father was more about dealing with things as they came. This made me feel distanced from him. I spent the most of my time with my mother and very briefly with my father. When I was 15, things became worse. My mother died in an accident, and I had no alternative but to move in with my father full-time. Honestly, those were some of my saddest days. It seems like I was the only one who actually missed her. My father had been with his girlfriend Emily, who is now 48, for several years. They got engaged right around the time my mother died, which made things much more difficult for me. My father seemed to be moving too quickly, focused on his new life with Emily rather than expressing genuine grief over the loss of Mom. Throughout my adolescence, I felt quite alone. Living with Emily wasn't easy either. She got immediately into attempting to be the new parent in the house, creating rules and expecting me to follow them. But how could someone just come in and behave as if they could replace my mother so quickly? It didn't set well with me, to make everything even more confusing. Emily had a son named Mike, who is now 31. She was always attempting to give him the upper hand. Whether it was a higher position on the football team or a larger role in the school play. Mike wasn't pleased with how his mother preferred him. He would even call her out on it, yet he still reaped the benefits of her efforts. My teen years were a whirlwind of emotions as I dealt with the death of my mother, a father who refused to defend me against Emily, and a stepbrother who was sweet but uneasy with me. I determined early on that all I needed to do was keep my head down, get through college, and then establish my own life on my terms. I ended up to USC, which was excellent because school was still in my home state, and I stayed home to save money. Both my father and Emily were fine with it. It wasn't like I was freeloading as long as I contributed to the rent and food. I was doing my part to assist out while concentrating on my schoolwork. However, I was utterly surprised when my father sat me down one day and said, "Son, we agreed that you would stay with us during your college years. But something has come up, Emily, and I believe you are distracting Mike with your hobbies and the company you bring around. As a result, we need to reach a new agreement." I was quite bewildered when I heard this from him since I didn't understand the context. I assumed he was referring to my buddies who occasionally came over to play games on my Y. Perhaps I was too loud with the music that night. I had no idea, and I questioned him. "What do you mean, Dad? My friend is a horrible influence on Mike. I promise we haven't taught him anything bad, and we usually stay out of each other's way, correct?" He said, "Yes, but that is not what I am talking about, Opie. I believe you and I both understand that Mike has strong feelings for Evelyn. We were thinking that you may end your relationship with her to keep the family at peace. We don't believe that a female should be more important than your brother's well-being, correct?" I laughed out when I heard this. It was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. I left, still giggling. "Sure, Dad, why don't I end an excellent relationship? Because your child is unable to accept no as an answer." I've already told him several times that he makes Evelyn uncomfortable, and I seldom invite her around anymore. What's the issue anyway? I knew he was skirting the issue, but I was beginning to understand Mike had gone all out with an if I can't, nobody can mentality. And Emily had undoubtedly requested Dad to talk to me about it to placate her son, while also ensuring that he did not waste any more time on this lady. I'm not sure how they expected me to roll over on this. It escalated into a massive battle, and I decided to stay with Evelyn and move out of the house. I packed my things one day and departed, changing my cell phone number in the process. I slept at a friend's apartment for a few days before moving in with my fiancée. Fortunately, I was at college on scholarship, and my primary challenges were paying for rent and utilities. But I hustled and worked late to make it happen. At this time, all ties with my family had been severed, and the only people I consider family now are a few relatives on my mother's side. It's been 12 years since then, and guess what? Evelyn and I married, and we both enjoy our careers and lifestyles. In fact, we recently purchased our first home and are trying for a kid. I truly believe that leaving my toxic family was the finest move I made. However, a few days ago, someone showed up at my door, which caused me to spiral and reflect on my history. Mike found out where I lived and came over one day, stating he needed to speak with me. I was too surprised to react, so I silently allowed him in once he had put himself at ease. We caught up briefly, but he already knew the overall idea of my life, which he had evidently learned from social media. Then he told me why he was here. He revealed a lot about his obsession with Evelyn, including his mother's participation. However, he also stated that he never wanted me to leave the house, which Emily had created entirely on her own. He stated his stepfather, a mother, appeared almost relieved that I was gone, and the house got really chilly and strange after that. For him. The three of them moved out of state a few months after I left, which I was unaware of, and Mike didn't know how to contact me at the time. Throughout this period, he had felt bad about the way I had laughed and had overcome his obsession with Evelyn. Surprise, surprise. However, due to his poor mental state, he ended up associating with the wrong crew in college and dropping out. The situation at home was as dire, and his mother was distraught by his lack of motivation and success, without ever bothering to find out why he was so miserable. This ultimately caused him to leave the house 10 years ago, and he's been traversing the states ever since, performing odd jobs and hitching. He approached me and asked if I would help him settle in this area, maybe by getting him a foot in the door at the company I work. For someone with no degree or qualifications, this would be challenging, and I made it obvious. But Mike said that I owe him this for abandoning him without a poisonous family. He maintains that despite our distance, we remained brothers. He departed approximately an hour ago. As I write this piece, I'm torn. I don't believe I owe him anything, yet it's dreadful to watch him like way. I chatted with Evelyn about it, and she said she would rather stay. I'm not in contact with any of my family members, including Mike. Yet I feel compelled to support him in some manner. Would I be an a-hole if I stopped socializing with my stepbrother? So, after going over all of your comments and thinking about the issue with Mike, I've decided what to do next. I believe the best option for Mike right now is to assist him get started on his own. I'm going to give him enough money to pay the cost of an inexpensive apartment for a few months. That way, he has a place to stay, and some time to think things through without worrying about where he will sleep each night. Plus, it's a bit like pushing him to stand on his own 2 feet, since I'm going to tell him he needs to start looking for a job himself. It's time for him to accept responsibility, do you know? I'm not sure if Mike and I will ever share that tight brotherly closeness. I mean, things between us have been tricky, and they may always be. But you folks offered some excellent points in your comments. I don't owe him anything when it comes to dealing with his own emotions and the issues he's going through. It might sound harsh, but it's the reality. I did what I needed to do for my own peace of mind. Giving him some assistance now is simply my attempt to be fair and give him a chance to get on his feet. So yes, that is the plan. Help him out a little, but make it plain that he needs to start carrying his own weight. Hopefully, this will get him started on a new chapter. And who knows, maybe things between us may improve with time. But for now, I'm just trying to do the right thing without getting too caught up in the emotional turmoil. Thank you for your advice. It let me see things more clearly. Hello, everyone. It's been a few months since I last told you about Mike and my situation. Well, after a few months, I have to say that Mike has truly found his groove here in town. He seems like a completely different guy than he was previously. He's secured a position as a junior manager at the local Walmart, which is great for him. The small sum of money we provided him to help him get started has worked wonderfully. He has been making good use of it, and now he's enrolling in night school to earn a degree. I am quite proud of him for taking these measures. It's exciting to see him turn his life around and get serious about his future. And to be honest, witnessing his success makes me want to be more engaged in his life, whether to help him out more or simply to be there for him. But there's still one thing that bothers me, despite all the wonderful developments. Mike still seems as if I owe him anything because I moved out earlier, leaving him feeling alone. Sometimes he brings it up in a way that makes me feel bad about my decisions. It's a little disappointing since I was only doing what I believed was best for me at the time. I spoke with some of my relatives about this scenario, and they believe I should simply confront it full on and have a genuine conversation with Mike about all of my thoughts. They believe a decent, honest confrontation will clear the air. I'm not generally the confrontational kind, but perhaps they're correct. It could help us get rid of this strange tension and go on, you know? So that's where I am right now. I'm thinking of sitting down with Mike, putting everything out and perhaps settling things out, so we may both be happy about our relationship. It is not easy, but that is family for you, right? There is always some drama, but there are also plenty of possibilities to grow closer if you manage things correctly. Thank you for staying with me through this summary, and I'll let you know how the conversation goes. I eventually had the conversation with Mike. It was about time I told him why. I don't think it's appropriate for him to expect things from me just because of our history. Despite the fact that I had to confront him with some unpleasant facts, I have to say that I believe he has matured into a nice man. He's changed a lot, and he deserves to be respected. And yes, some love from me. The conversation was a little emotional, and it took Mike a while to fully catch the complete picture. Comprehending the small details, like why it's not right to hang on to those old expectations. But he got there in the end. And you know what? He truly apologized. He apologized for imposing that unjust load on me, and even thanked me for all the assistance I had provided. It felt pretty fantastic, not going to lie. There's more good news. Evelyn. Yeah, she's had troubles with Mike as well, especially because of some strange signals he has given out in the past. She's also coming around. Mike went to her on his own and apologized privately for his previous actions. That takes guts, and I genuinely admire him for it. Evelyn has warmed up to him somewhat since then, and it appears that things are finally beginning to settle down. So it appears that Mike will be welcome in our home from now on. It's a major step, and I'm optimistic about where things are going with him. What about his mother and father? That's a different tale. Suppose Mike and I are on the same page there. To say we dislike them is an understatement. So they aren't exactly on our favorite people list, and I doubt that will change anytime soon, haha. Anyway, that's everything for now. It's been a roller coaster, but things appear to be improving. Thank you for all your help and suggestions. It's definitely helped me deal with the circumstance. I'll keep you posted on how things progress from here. Just when I thought things with Mike were getting better, life has decided to throw another problem our way. So yesterday was simply another ordinary work day for me. Nothing unusual happened. It was just business as usual. Midway through the day, my phone calls, and it's Evelyn, who seems more upset than I've heard in a long time. She claims Mike showed up abruptly at our place. We agreed with Mike that if he wanted to drop by, he needed to let us know ahead of time. Common politeness, right? But there he was, popping up unexpectedly. Here, S, when things become difficult. Mike did not come over for a simple catch-up or something humorous. After some nervous chit-chat, he launches into an emotional confession. It turns that he still has feelings for Evelyn. Yes, that's correct. Despite all that has happened, this guy has not let go of his former crush. But that is not all. He goes on to ask Evelyn if she would give him a chance, basically implying that they may be something more. Evelyn is a rock star. Shut it down immediately. She informed him straight that it wasn't going to happen, that she was 100% devoted to our marriage, and that his sentiments were utterly improper. But Mike did not take the rejection well. He began arguing, became clearly irritated, and even approached her in an inappropriate manner. Fortunately, Evelyn handled the issue and threw him out before things worsened. She had the sense to videotape the entire incident on her phone. When I found out about this, I immediately left work, furious and prepared to confront Mike. But by the time I arrived home, he had already disappeared. I was very furious. Unable to think clearly after all of the conversations and efforts to reestablish trust and brotherhood, it felt as if we had taken a giant step backward. Evelyn was obviously rattled by the incident, and I was left scrambling to make sense of Mike's behavior and choose our next move. Now I'm stuck thinking how to deal with this whole issue. Should I confront Mike directly? Should we cut ties totally this time? It appears like every attempt to heal our relationship is hampered by another difficulty. And now, there's the added issue of his improper behavior toward my wife. The issue is a jumble, and I'm having trouble seeing a clear route ahead. So there is the update. It's another twist in the narrative. That describes my connection with my stepbrother. If anyone has any suggestions or has gone through something similar, I'd be grateful to hear it because this is far more than I expected to deal with. Following the latest episode with Mike, when he abruptly showed up at our house and revealed his affections for Evelyn, the atmosphere soon became combative and unpleasant. My first response was rage. I mean the boiling point. Seeing red indicates rage. It was a lot to digest, and for the first 3 hours, all I could think about was locating Mike and confronting him in person, perhaps even physically. I was really unhappy. I drove about town for the greater part of the evening, checking some of the regular places I expected him to be. But Mike was not to be found. He seemed to have vanished from existence, right after inciting this storm in our life. My irritation rose as I tried and failed to find him. It was as if he had tossed a grenade into our life and then fled before the aftermath. After several hours of futile searching, I returned home to Evelyn. Seeing her so shocked by what had occurred and addressing it helped bring me back to reality. I knew that attempting to resolve this through a physical confrontation would be futile and may further exacerbate the situation. Evelyn, the voice of reason, offered a more productive approach. We discussed it and decided that the best course of action was to use the legal system to protect our safety and to establish a solid boundary that Mike could not breach. She reminded me that we had videotaped the whole encounter on her phone, which included not just his improper confession, but also his hostile actions following. The next morning, with a clearer mind but a sorrowful heart, I went to the police station to submit a report. It was a difficult decision filled with conflicting feelings. On the one hand, Mike was once someone I considered family, despite our confusing and contentious connection. On the other hand, his activities had gone too far and could not be ignored. I passed over Evelyn's recording to the cops, who studied it closely and took notes. The police were quite sympathetic. They recognized the gravity of the issue and immediately launched an investigation. They said that depending on how things played out, this evidence may result in a restraining order. Legally. Filing the police report felt like a vital step toward regaining some sense of security, but it wasn't without its emotional consequences. It put an end to whatever last dreams I might have had of reconciling with Mike. As I exited the police station, a part of me felt relieved. I felt relieved that we were taking actual actions to defend ourselves and that the law was on our side. But there was also a great sense of grief, the realization that the familial relationship I had tried to save was now irreparable. The journey back home was silent as I tried to comprehend all of the emotions whirling inside. Back at home, Evelyn and I had a lengthy discussion about all that had occurred. We spoke about our next moves and how we'd manage things moving ahead. It was evident that our relationship with Mike had reached a stage where we would only contact through legal channels, if at all. We both agreed that we wanted no more communication with him until absolutely necessary. The reality of fully removing someone from your life, particularly someone who was formerly considered family, is stark and brutal. However, for our personal well-being, it seemed like the only possible alternative. The last several days since submitting the report have been a bit of a waiting game. We are waiting to see how the legal process plays out. We're waiting to hear back from the police and for some kind of normalcy to return to our lives. This entire situation has had a major impact on both of us. There are times when I'm angry, when I'm deeply disappointed, and when the weight of the issue feels too much. Despite the chaos, there have been a few modest bright spots. Dealing with this together has given Evelyn and I newfound vigor in our relationship. It has reminded us of the value of supporting one another and standing together in the face of adversity. We quote, "V also been really appreciative for the assistance of friends and a few family members who are aware of the situation. Their words of support and offers of assistance have provided a little ray of light in what has otherwise been a very gloomy moment. Following my last refresh, in which I discussed filing a report against Mike for his unexpected and hostile actions, things moved faster than I imagined. The police were quite efficient after they obtained all of the evidence, including Evelyn's phone recording. They tracked down Mike and arrested him based on what had happened and their own investigations. This was not the end I had planned for, but his actions left us with no other option. And while I was happy that there was some kind of protection and that he couldn't just come up at our house again, I hadn't really begun to understand what had happened. When another unexpected twist occurred, my phone called one evening and the display displayed a name I hadn't seen in more than a decade. My dad. The sight of his name sparked a whirlwind of emotions, ranging from ancient wrath to a flash of optimistic curiosity, as I wondered why he had decided to contact after all these years. I answered the phone, motivated in part by the faint hope that this may be the first step toward reconciliation or understanding. However, such aspirations were swiftly destroyed. When I heard the tone of his and Emily's voices, there was neither warmth or sadness over the years of stillness. There is no subtle sliding into discussion. Instead, they drove right into the problem. As if the previous 12 years of remoteness and stillness had vanished into thin air. They immediately went on a diatribe about how foolish it was of me to file charges against Mike, asking that I drop them. Their statements were harsh and demanding, as if they had the authority to control my activities. After all that had occurred. And if that wasn't enough, they leveled an accusation against Evelyn, alleging she had set Mike up, manipulating the circumstances to make him appear worse than he was. The claim was not only false, but also extremely offensive. The shock of their audacity made my blood boil. More importantly, it reminded me of why I had separated myself from them in the first place. After a 12-year absence, they were back, still attempting to dominate and manipulate me, expecting me to do anything they wanted. It was as if they expected me to simply fall back into line, like back when I didn't know any better than to follow their lead. I managed to keep my voice calm despite my internal turmoil of fury and disappointment. "So you want to discuss?" I replied, my words tinged with astonishment and frigid wrath. I did not wait for their response. I warned them never to contact me again and stopped the phone before they could say anything further. Hanging up on them was like closing a huge ironclad door on an area of my life that had long brought me more grief than peace. It was a decisive action, one that said no to manipulation, emotional blackmail, and connections that caused more harm than good. Evelyn was right beside me. Her presence provided consistent comfort. We talked about it, and she totally agreed that we didn't need that type of negativity in our life, and that our well-being and tranquility were too essential to sacrifice. The aftermath of that call gave me a lot to think about. I spent many hours at night contemplating on what family means, on the relationships we choose to maintain, and those we choose to break. Now, more than ever, I understand that family is more than simply blood links. It's about knowing who will stand by you, support you, and respect your decisions. It's about the individuals that support you in your darkest hours, give you strength when you're down, and rejoice with you when you're at your happiest. In the days afterward, while we await the outcome of Mike's legal processes, I've gained some clarity. Making challenging decisions that prioritize our safety and mental health brings us insight. It hasn't been easy, and there are times when the weight of everything feels overpowering, but there's also a sense of rightness in knowing we're taking precautions to protect ourselves and construct a life surrounded by others who actually care. We have received significant help from friends and a few family members. Their words of support and presence, whether tangible or via texts and phone calls, have lifted my spirits. It's reminded me that while we may have had to end certain ties, we've also welcomed others, folks who have showed us what genuine family looks like. Hello, everyone. I have a variety of things to share with you today, beginning with some very good news. Despite all of the hurdles we've faced, Evelyn and I are expecting a baby. Finding out we're going to be parents has added a whole new level of delight and anticipation to our lives. That's difficult to articulate. It's a moving time for both of us, full with aspirations and ambitions for the future we'll offer our child. This happy news comes as a welcome relief, especially given the turbulent times we've been having. It's like a promise of rejuvenation and optimism after being surrounded by so much negativity. Planning for our baby's birth has provided us with a magnificent focus, a project full of love and enthusiasm. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we're debating potential names, visualizing what our child will look like, and arranging the nursery. We are still dealing with Mike's continuing legal predicament. The process has been lengthy and often exhausting. We just visited with our lawyer who gave us some information on what to expect moving ahead. Based on the evidence and charges, Mike may face 5 to 7 years in jail. It's a hefty truth that elicits a range of feelings from us. Despite all that has transpired. There is no joy in witnessing someone I once considered family dealing with such a brutal reality. It evokes a gloomy thought on how things came to this point, as well as the succession of decisions that led us through this legal maze. Our priority has been to protect our integrity and ensure our safety. To remain up to date on all developments, we've been attending hearings and communicating closely with our legal staff. The heaviness of the legal processes contrasts sharply with the lightness and delight we experience when we think of our expecting kid. This duality of experiences has been a difficult journey, as I prepare for a new life while still grappling with pieces of my past that I wish might have been different. Evelyn has been amazing throughout it all. Her courage and tenacity have helped me through the tough times, and her joy about our baby is contagious. We V spent a lot of time discussing how we want to raise our child. These conversations center around values such as compassion, understanding, and strength. As we prepare for our new arrival, we want to provide a loving environment that differs greatly from the upheaval and struggle that have defined some of my familial ties. We have also made a conscious decision to avoid unhealthy partnerships. The clarity that comes with anticipating a kid has strengthened our determination to keep our family peaceful. We've been renovating our house, putting together a nursery, and reading a variety of parenting literature. Each activity strengthened our closeness and increased our excitement about our family's future. Reflecting on family relationships, I've grown to appreciate the support of our friends and the few family members who have been there for us. Their support has been a constant reminder that family is more than simply blood links. It's about choosing who you want in your life, who supports you, and who shares your beliefs. This network of chosen family has been invaluable in keeping us grounded and focused on what is actually important. Looking ahead, the birth of our kid feels like the start of a new chapter, one in which we can focus on making wonderful memories and leaving a legacy of love and respect. It's an opportunity for us to move on from previous struggles and embrace the joys of motherhood. Despite Mike's current legal problem, which we will continue to treat with the utmost care, we are increasingly optimistic about the future. It has not been simple to balance our baby's preparedness with legal processes. There are days when the burden seems unbearable, when the glacial pace of legal processes appears incongruous with the fast preparations for our new arrival. However, these difficulties have brought us closer together, strengthening our bond and dedication to our family's well-being. I'm thankful to the group of friends, both online and in person, who have encouraged and supported me throughout these trying times. Sharing my experience with you has given not only a therapeutic outlet for me, but also useful insights and counsel as we move forward. I'll keep you all posted on both the happy and difficult elements of our lives. Your involvement and support have been pillars of strength for us, and I want to share more about our journey into motherhood and beyond. Here, quote, hope that the next few posts will be filled with more excitement as we come closer to introducing our new family member into the world. Thank you for being with us through thick and thin. Your support and ideas have been bright spots in an otherwise challenging trip. Last modified. First, the most excellent news. Evelyn and I welcomed our gorgeous baby into the world. Our child's birth has been nothing short of amazing, altering our lives in ways we never dreamed. Every tear and smile reinforces our commitment to focus on creating a supportive and loving atmosphere free of prior toxicity. Seeing Evelyn embrace parenthood with elegance and compassion has further increased my appreciation and affection for her. She has been great. And seeing her with our kid makes every difficult moment we've had together worthwhile, in parallel with the delight of new parenting. The end of Mike's trial has also been an important aspect of our recent lives. After what seemed like an eternity of hearings and waiting, the court imposed a 6-year sentence. It is a lengthy time that represents the gravity of his crimes on the day of sentence. I had a quick talk with Mike. I conveyed my hope that he will take this time to truly ponder and maybe find a new course for his life. The discussion was quick and intense, with unsaid feelings and remorse for previous courses chosen, sorrow at the destroyed familial connections, and gloomy acceptance of the new reality. This closure, while necessary, was not celebrated. It felt more like an acknowledgement that some chapters in our life needed to be closed, not with delight, but with a peaceful acceptance to safeguard our future and concentrate on the positives that we can influence. It also put an end to any remaining prospect for reconciliation with Mike, my father, and Emily. Their absence from all recent events strengthened our conviction that separating ourselves was the proper decision. Reflecting on this, my understanding of family has evolved significantly. I've learned that family is defined not only by blood, but by the relationships you choose to foster and your dedication to supporting one another through life's challenges and joys. Evelyn and I have felt this transition strongly, and we have decided to spend our efforts in connections that promote happiness and growth for both ourselves and our kid. Our baby's future is what motivates us right now. We've been envisioning all of the firsts we'll have. First steps, first words, first birthdays. We are planning the type of upbringing we want our child to have. Emphasizes compassion, respect, understanding, and most importantly, love. We wish to inculcate principles in our child that inspire them to accept variety, seek understanding, and act compassionately toward others. As we adjust to our new duties as parents, our house has become a haven of love and laughter. Despite the long nights and steep learning curve that come with motherhood, we've converted one of the rooms into a lively nursery. We choose colors and themes that we think will stimulate our child's creativity and pleasure. Each decision, from the literature on the shelf to the toys in the crib, has been selected with careful consideration and expectation. Furthermore, our talks frequently revolve around how we would disclose our history with our child when the time comes. We agree that honesty, expressed in an age-appropriate and constructive manner, shall be our guiding principle. We want our child to learn from our experiences, to comprehend the intricacies of human relationships, and to realize that while life can be difficult at times, there is always a way to recover and be happy. Throughout this difficult time, our community's support, both locally and online, has been extremely encouraging. Your comments, experiences, and words of encouragement have not only helped us get through the difficult times, but have also celebrated our wins alongside us. This virtual journal has developed into more than simply a collection of postings. It's been a shared adventure that has introduced us to so many lovely folks. Looking forward. While I may no longer be updating this topic, the voyage is far from over. We are only at the beginning of this beautiful journey of parenting our child and seeing the world through their eyes. I hope to continue sharing aspects of our lives in different ways. Perhaps we should focus more on the joys and challenges of parenting rather than the prior disagreements. In finishing this chapter, I'd want to offer my heartfelt gratitude to all of you. You've been with us through both the most terrible and the most wonderful times of our life. Your participation has been more than simply a source of consolation. It has served as a light of hope, reminding us of the world's generosity and support. Here is to new beginnings, to the experiences that await, and to all of you. Thank you for being a part of this adventure. Your support has meant everything to us, and we are excited to share the next chapters of our life with you, filled with as much optimism and happiness as we feel right now.